Stratos! Stratos! Stratos!
Gavel! Gavel! Gavel!
Yes, Stratos. Everyone's favorite winged monkey. Well, maybe not everyone's. But let's just say most people's favorite winged monkey was here at last in the Masters of the Universe Classics collection. Now, Stratos was actually a personal favorite of mine. He was one of the first figures I got as a kid, and I just found him incredibly, how would you say, not inspiring, but he just playific? That's not even a word, I'm making that up, but he was just so much fun to play with. I mean, he had a rocket ship, or rocket pack, and he had wings, and he was a monkey, and he was gray, and yeah, it was exciting to get to Stratos, because, back when we were doing the first couple figures, had no idea if we were even going to be able to do the first 3 2-packs. That might have been it. So we originally, as I mentioned in previous videos, had planned Masters of the Universe Classics as a series of 2-packs. So the first of those was going to be He-Man versus Beastman, because a lot of people thought Beastman wouldn't sell on his own. And then after that was going to be Stratos versus Skeletor. And after that, we were going to get to the 3rd pack, Man-at-Arms versus Merman. Now, while they were originally planned as 2-packs, after making a big case to management about the need to release them as singles from a price standpoint, it was agreed that we could break them up and separate them and try selling them individually, because maybe Beastman and Stratos and Merman would be popular enough to sell on their own. Well, considering we eventually did Snout Spout and Rio Blast and, all those other characters, it pretty much was a no-brainer. Now, the reason that we did these characters is because they all shared the common body types from the Vintage line. And this was very important, and it was also how the Vintage line worked from a financial standpoint. So you had 3 body types in the Masters of the Universe and in the Masters of the Universe Classics line. You had the reptile body type, you had the human body type, and then, of course, you had what was called the beastie body type. And these 3 body types became the basis for all of the original releases. If you remember the original 8-pack, some of them were even combinations, like Zodak, who we'll get to, who sort of used parts from all 3 of the bodies on one figure. But it was, from a financial standpoint, what allowed all of the characters right at once, because you only really needed to tool 3 bodies, but you could get, 6 to 8 characters out of that with new heads and new armor. And essentially, we were able to take this key learning from the Vintage line and just carry it forward to Masters of the Universe Classics. And because we followed that roadmap, it's why we were able to afford the first year. Now, of course, there were characters in the original release, like Teela, and Teela obviously had her own body type, which meant she was going to be 100% original tool, which meant that she was going to have to get pushed off at least a couple figures down the road, even though we knew eventually we'd be able to reuse her body buck for other characters, like specifically Evelyn, who in the Vintage line was the same figure with a new head and a new skin tone. But from a tooling perspective, and I've mentioned this in other videos, the tools are the giant molds to make action figures. These things are really expensive. A fully tooled figure is going to cost between $50,000 and $100,000. So you have to be really careful with how you spend your money. And part of doing classics was making the case to management that we would follow the same kind of creative design as the Vintage line, not just to pay homage to it, but because it made financial sense. Because using these basic body types, you could make a ton of figures. And more or less, new heads and armor would give you a new character. Now, after Skeletor was a total and complete sellout, or at least he sold out before the next figure went on sale, which wasn't the case with He-Man and Beastman, we knew that now we had a long-term plan. And So when we were gearing up to do Stratos, this was when I started working on what became the infamous roadmap, which was where we looked at all the characters we had access to and plotted them out in sort of a 10-year roadmap to ensure every year had a robust selection and a financially balanced selection. Now, the interesting thing is, characters like, for example, Bikini Tila. She was on the roadmap from day one. All the research that I did, I found images of her, and I was like, oh, fans are definitely going to want this character. I mean, I know I want this character. And lo and behold, I think she was released in June or July of 2011. I'm sure fans will correct me on that. But the fact is, she was in the roadmap from day one. So even when we were getting things like fan requests for her, those requests and those wish lists online wound up becoming much more about validation, shall we say, that the roadmap was following the right path of what fans wanted versus, oh my god, why did I put this character on the roadmap? No one's asking for her. So while it was great to get the fan requests, and I always looked at them, they didn't have as much effect on the roadmap, only in the sense that it was designed at the time of Stratos, and not that it was locked in stone, but it was created at that time because we had to balance from a financial and character rollout, the logic of doing a long-term line to not run out and to not break the bank. Now, as I mentioned, again, it was not set in stone, and we did make changes, and some of those changes did come from fan requests. I'm not saying we ignored them, but I'm saying things like the requests for Bikini Tila in the first few years were kind of funny because we knew she was already in the roadmap and she was coming, and I got to smile whenever I saw those kind of requests. We did make two changes that the Horsemen actually requested. One was they asked us to reverse the release of Whiplash and Buzz Off because they wanted to figure out the tail attachment before they dealt with the wings from a logistic standpoint. Additionally, Eric really wanted Clawful, and I didn't have him originally till much, much later in the line. And so he just asked me as a personal favor if I could move him up earlier in the line, which I was more than delighted to do, because the Horsemen are awesome, and anything I could do to support them was awesome. Alright, so back to Stratos. So one thing to talk about him was the lack of accessories. Stratos didn't come with any accessories. And it wasn't that we couldn't think of any accessories to do with Stratos. I mean, there were obvious choices, and later Stratos figures came overloaded with cool accessories. The reason he didn't have any accessories was he was basically mimicking the vintage figure, which didn't have any accessories. And when we were only doing a couple of these 2-packs, and we didn't think we'd get farther than 6 figures, then, it kind of didn't really matter. The idea was to pay homage to the vintage line. Later on, the plan became, well, let's design the whole line with the idea that eventually we'll get to retail. The whole idea was in a movie year, we were going to release classics in retail packaging, and to make them different from the online release, we would remove one accessory. So it kind of became a rule that every figure needed at least 2 accessories, and a head could count as that, so that the eventual movie year retail release would be different from the online release. So that was why all the figures were coming with 2 accessories. But Stratos, like I said, he was on his own, and that was okay. We probably just could have added an accessory for his eventual retail release. And obviously this was to make as much money as possible for Mattel and to sell as many toys as possible because, oh gee, shocker, Mattel is in it to make money. Yes, obviously, like any giant manufacturer. Okay, so one issue which has come up on some previous videos was the belt issue. The vendor swapped Beastman and Stratos' belts, and in fact, this went so far along in production that there were actually packaged samples. And in fact, this is one of the items up on my charity for eBay auction, which there'll be a link in the description, that he got so far as packaged. And this was really my first big fight with engineering, because I was adamant you couldn't release the figure this way, and engineering was like, look, it's our own character, who cares how we release it? But I said, no, you really have 2 ways of releasing Stratos. There were 2 designs in the vintage line, but they both had a red belt. We cannot release him with a yellow belt. And they gave in, I won the fight, and the belts were swapped. Now, speaking of these 2 vintage looks, also, which one were we going to do in the Classics line, since they both were in the Vintage line. Well, in the end, we went for the blue backpack and the red wing. Not only was this the look from the recent 2000X line, which kind of helped establish a definitive look, but, well, to be honest, this was the version I had as a kid and that I really wanted. So it didn't mean the other version wasn't possible, and we did get to that version eventually. In fact, when we did this other version, corrected an issue with the wings. The version on the single card, the first release, the wings were glued in place. They didn't rotate. And so we were able to fix that with the later release, which, was pretty cool. I actually, when fans were asking for articulated wings, what I thought they meant was wings that came in and out like the 2000X line. And it was my mistake that I didn't realize what they were asking for was to not glue them down. But hey, early figure, best laid plans. We were off to a great start, and Stratos was a great figure.